good morning or good afternoon, depending upon the time slot. My friends, hear these familiar words from Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time for war, and a time for peace. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to be born, and a time to die. Again, good afternoon, and welcome to our time of remembrance and celebration. And I want to point out to each and every one of you the importance of our gathering here today. Our presence provides love and support for each other and for the entire extended Zion family. Friends, we are here to celebrate not just a life, but two lives. We gather to celebrate the lives of the Reverend C. Larry Fisher and the Reverend Stephen M. Anderson, to give thanks for their lives of service and for the experiences that we shared, and to bless their memory now that our time together is over. And it is important for us to acknowledge and important for us to accept that something fundamental has changed with Steve and Larry's going. Life will not be the same without them, and life should not be the same without them. In your hymnal, you'll find Morning Has Broken, which is number 53. And so, let us rise as we're able and give voice to this beautiful hymn.
Because the Reverend Larry Fisher and I were co-pastor emeriti. If you know your Greek, there were two of us until just a couple of days ago. And I was the pastor that became pastor at Zion Hartford Road after Steve Anderson. And then when we moved the church to Perry Hall, I went with it. And after serving there 25 years, we decided to come over this way and join in with Zion, at that time, Golden Ring. And I was here a couple months ago, 2 months ago, for that service. But today, friends, we gather here in a protective shelter of God's love We're free to pour out our sadness. Our loss is very real. To relax our feelings, and I would ask God blessing on some small remembrances that I have of two colleagues, the Reverend Stephen Anderson and the Reverend Larry Fisher. So let us pray. I know that you, God, care about all our prayers and loving remembrances of friends and colleagues. We spend so much time with them on earth. And this morning, this afternoon, we now rejoice that they are at peace with you and your Son and your Spirit in heaven. As we continue here on earth, gracious God, we celebrate and miss these two friends and colleagues and pastors this afternoon. But we always reaffirm our living in and by God's grace. Amen. I would share these scriptures. The first is an epistle from Romans 12. And I call it the marks of a Christian, and it certainly represents these two fine pastors. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil, but hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not languish in zeal, but be ardent in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. And from Psalm 40, which frankly is one of my favorite psalms, and I think it would be Steve and Larry's also, but one of them. Psalm 40, these few verses. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up out of the desolate pit, out of the miry bog. And God set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. God put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise for our God. Many will see and obey and put their trust also in the Lord of these two fine men that we remember today. And if you are able now, I would share with you a reading from John, the Gospel. In this church, it's a habit to stand up if you're able. If not, that's fine too. From John 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled, said Jesus. Believe in God, believe also in me. For in my Father's house are many mansions, many rooms, many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, Jesus said, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. And then Jesus concluded by saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. I already mentioned our fine companies that I don't preach anymore, so you're in luck. But I do tell stories. And boy, have I got some on these two. Let me start with Steve Anderson, since there's a direct tie in our ministries together. Steve served as pastor of Zion UCC on Harford Road, down in Hamilton on Harford Road, in Baltimore, and I think he served approximately 14 years. I hope you appreciate how unusual it is in churches for a same pastor to deal that many years as the head pastor. In fact, Steve replaced John Royer, who had been there since World War II. And then Steve stayed 14 years of it. While he was at Zion, he and some parishioners began a very interesting program called, it was in the basement of that old church down on Hartford and Iona Terrace. And it was called the Hartford Senior Center because there were some seniors, and you'll hear more about this because we have one of the original directors with us today. But the Senior Center was to help some of the senior citizens in the church and the immediate area. But you know what happened? A lot of it was because of Steve and his willingness to keep looking ahead and planning for the future. It grew out of that basement in Zion Church and is today still existing, but it's got its own building, a permanent location on Hartford Road, about 6 blocks further up Hartford Road. Is its presence building, and it's now one of the official senior centers of the whole city of Baltimore that was started from somebody's idea in the basement of a church. And that was partly because of Steve, and I think probably a lot of it was because of Steve. Pastor Steve also became, after he left the church, and I think it was about 1987 or around that, or no, it must have been before, 83 or so. Well, then Steve didn't just live on his glory from that church down in northern Baltimore City. Then he became the assistant director of something called the Hoffman Homes for Youth, which is now spread all over southern Pennsylvania and Lancaster County. But Steve was the assistant director of Hoffman Homes for Youth in Littlestown, Pennsylvania, around 1985, I would guess. This is a long time ago, but old preachers or old storytellers have a lot of old stories to tell. And it was around 1985 that I became the pastor at Zion UCC on Hartford Road. And that started quite a long thing because I retired from that church 25 years later. And by that time they'd come to Perry Hall, and that's how they came to be part of this fellowship a few months ago. But back to Steve. I have to confess that I probably spent a lot of time, now don't take this the wrong way, with Steve's wife, Jane Anderson. And Jane and I would often meet at the annual workshop in the spring at Johns Hopkins Hospital. And it was a nationwide organization called DRADA, Depression and Related Affective Disorders Association. And we'd go to the workshops because she had a special interest with Mary and her daughter suffering from depression. And by the way, if you couldn't tell, I'm bipolar, I'm manic depressive, so that's why I like to talk so much. And so the people that Jane and Steve were very concerned with were people that also had mental illness, or people like the kids at Hoffman Homes, boys and girls that were separated because of some problem, not only because they were orphans, they weren't just orphans, they sometimes needed to retune their lives in a more positive way. So Steve and Jane and their children, believe it or not, remained in Baltimore. Steve commuted to Pennsylvania every day. That's an opposite for us. And the funny thing about the Andersons were, they lived in a very close-knit area of UCC pastors near Towson High School. So I started calling it the Towson Hills, because I would go to see the Andersons, and then I could walk around and see the Cooks. And Ralph Cook was pastor at St. Matthew's UCC across from my church and across Harriman Park. And I would see the Bartells, and we still see them on Wednesdays sometimes when we get together for the older pastor's lunch. I won't say, because he's not retired yet, by the way. And we'd get together with those pastors all the time and kept in touch. And the pastors and families of a number of years until Steve was called back into the active ministry as pastor of Pilgrim UCC in Montgomery County until his retirement. And as a matter of fact, his formal funeral will be coming up in October at Christ Church and Pilgrim Church in Silver Springs, Maryland, in October. Whew, that's one. And it happened the same day, Craig told me. I thought it was a couple days apart that they both passed on. Now, to my co-pastor emeriti and a dear friend for almost 50 years, the Reverend Larry Fisher. We didn't just start with this church. Thanks be to my wife, Barbara, and her computer last week, I attended Larry's formal funeral in Burlington, North Carolina, this past week on something called Zoom. I think some of you probably have heard of it because you've got a camera right there that works at your service. I met Pastor Larry, though, many years before, sometime around 1980. And at that time, Larry was pastor of Christ Church in Hagerstown, before he even came to Zion Golden Ring. And I was associate pastor of Evangelical Reformed Church in Frederick, one of the clustered spires, whoop-de-doo. At his funeral in North Carolina, Larry's his granddaughter mentioned that Pop, as she called him, Larry, always loved to do magic tricks, and I'd forgotten that. He was pretty good at sleight of hands magic. Some of you may remember him because Larry loved more than anything else helping people to be happy and to be feeling special and to be joyful. Not just because he was a minister, but because he was just a darn nice guy. And I can say that about him. At his funeral in North Carolina, they went back even further. And that's why I'm wearing this cross, made out of bamboo fronds from Palm Sunday, that usually you would save and then you'd burn them all up for the next Ash Wednesday. When Larry was pastor in Hagerstown, I don't know if many of you know this story, he started in that church a group that helped homeless people in the area in Hagerstown where the church was. Sounds just like Steve back in Zion. Larry was doing that in Hagerstown. Well, he met an African-American woman who was older and homeless in Hagerstown back in the early 80s. And she said, because he was carrying the palm fronds one Palm Sunday, "What are you going to do with those?" And he said, "Well, we save them and we grind them up and we burn them for Ash Wednesday." And they said, "Oh, no. Don't you know how to make a cross out of a palm frond? And son of a gun, if you fold it a certain way, and it's all two pieces and it becomes one in the sign of the cross." She taught Larry how to do that, and Larry used to do that around here. And he certainly did it when he and his wife lived in Middle River for all of his grandkids, because his granddaughter told the story down in Burlington last week in North Carolina. So that's why I'm wearing this today, kind of in honor of a good friend, Larry. Larry was also a person, as we should remember, of great joy and peace. And that's why I'm wearing red, and I asked Craig to wear red today. It's not the liturgical color, that's green. But because I consider this a celebration of Larry and a celebration of the Pastor Steve that I followed. That's the way I look. And boy, don't you think I've been thinking about it. Two of my oldest colleagues pass away within the same day, and then the next week we're gathering together for a memorial. And I keep thinking at my age, who's next? Uh-oh, I better hurry up and get this finished. So Larry was a person of joy and peace and a devoted minister full of love for all of fellow human beings, no matter what their race or status, whether they were homeless whether they had a home, whether they were good members of a big church. By the way, when I saw his service in Burlington at the big downtown church he was a member, and his kids were members of, I thought I was in this church. I looked on Zoom, and the guy was up in the balcony, and he spun it around. Stained glass windows, stained glass windows, stained glass window. I thought, wait a minute, which church am I in? It was interesting and an odd coincidence that the church he was actually buried from is very, very similar to this. And I think he would approve of that. So finally, enough of the serious topics and thinking about them. I have to tell some stories, so bear with me. Larry Fisher was the only pastor I ever knew who owned a fishing boat when he and his wife lived in the Middle River. I didn't know another pastor that bothered to have a fishing boat, to own a boat. You're never off on weekends, are you? You never get a Sunday off unless you ask for it special. And it usually only happens once during the summer. Well, this past week, in talking with somebody else, that gentleman in the wheelchair, your son Dale, I was talking to him, and you know what he was doing? He said, yeah, you go over and see my dad. I'm going to go out crabbing in my boat. So your son has a boat too, Henry. Son of a gun, 2 pastors. And Dale, of course, is the pastor of Cambridge, Maryland now. Some of you probably may remember him when he grew up in this church. Pastors don't get many weekends off. So why have a boat? I'd not to figure that out. Larry and his wife Nancy came to this church in 1987, I've heard. And I had moved to Zion on Harford Road in 1985. I guess Baltimore got a couple of those old Western preacher men from the Catoctin Mountains. But more than our long relationship, Larry and I were also born on almost the same date. Larry's birthday was February 28th. Mine's the next day, March 1st. And each early spring, and including this year, before he passed on, he and I'd be on the telephone. And you know what we did? This is typical Larry. We'd sing happy birthday to each other on the telephone. And we'd celebrate. That was what Larry's gift was. He loved to celebrate things. And needless to say, we also had one other thing in common that kept us pretty close, even up to this month when he passed away. Larry would recall his pet cat, Berlioz. Like the composer, Gustav Berlioz. Well, Larry would tell me all about that cat that he had even after he left Zion, the Golden Ring. Well, I've just inherited a cat this past year called Chloe. And so Larry and I talk on the phone, even up to this last time of merger of our 2 churches. And what do we talk about? Our cats. Berlioz and Chloe, what are we doing? But it was Larry who always was a person who gave love to all that he met. Very unusual. I don't think I ever saw him raise an angry word. Certainly not at me. So I say, God bless Larry as he blessed us so deeply. And now with Pastor Craig's permission, or maybe he wants to get involved, we'd like to invite any of you who are with us today that remember something that would like to add to these memories. Now's a good time. Okay? You're first. And tell the people who you are for sure. Can you get that okay?
Well, most of you know me as Henry coming to our church over on Harvard Road, and very enthusiastic about doing things to make the church welcome seniors. And he asked me if I would consider managing senior housing. Well, I thought, okay, why me? And about a year before that, Steve had asked me to help one of the seniors in the church. She needed help with cooking and with her apartment and stuff like that, so I went, and she had this, I have to call it, it has to be, a certain pan to use to cook a certain food. And I thought, that's crazy. You know, why do you have to have a certain pan to cook a certain food? She said, because it tastes better in that pan. And probably about 20 years later, I'm cooking something on my stove in my house, and I pulled out a certain pan to cook some food. And I thought about her, and I thought, oh my gosh, she was right. So then Steve had asked me if I would become involved with opening a senior center at the church. And again, I thought, why is he picking me to do this? But I was going through a divorce, and I had a 3-year-old son, and I brought him down to the senior center, and he learned a lot about seniors. And I'm thankful to this day that he's still like that, where he enjoys talking to people, and especially seniors. We started this senior center, and we thought, oh, we'll probably just be open a couple days a week. We went full-time the next week, 5 days a week, and we probably on some days had up to 40 people in the building. We did everything. We danced. John Travolta was doing, what was the movie he was in, and they were doing the dancing, and they all lined up, and everybody was dancing the dance that John Travolta was doing. And then we started the Eating Together program. We went on trips. I took them to Florida, to Vermont, to the Smoky Mountains. We participated in all kinds of activities. We had a quilting group, and Steve had approached Brooks Funeral Home to provide a vehicle once a week to take our seniors over to Golden Ring Mall. So we asked them if they would take us down we made this quilt, and we took it downtown, and the Department of Aging was having a contest. Well, our group won, and we were so proud of ourselves. And we walked over to this limousine and go get in this limousine, and somebody made a remark, well, you have a limousine and you needed to come to the Department of Aging? I said, it's Rock's Funeral Home. I said, you should call one of your funeral homes and get rides for seniors. But we had so much, we learned so much. We had Christmas plays, and the church hall was full, and people were laughing. And it just became such a well-known senior center. And then they eventually moved out of the church, and I stopped to visit one day, and I saw a photograph of me and a group of the seniors that we were going on a trip. And I happened, this lady had come over, and she was the director, and I said I was the first director. She said, really? She didn't believe me. And I showed her on the photograph, and said, this is me. But I'm so proud that that senior center is still going. And, Steve was the person that got that going, made sure it was being financially supported, And it was really a good thing for not only the church, but for the community. So, lessons learned. Don't be afraid to try something, because it probably will work if you've got the right people.
Okay, since this is a legendary preacher kind of a service, we need to hear somebody that do something about Larry Fisher. Ah, back in the back, come on. Well, stand up and yell real loud. Come on up.
I yell.
No, you're good, I know.
Well, one thing I will do is correct you a little bit, I'm sorry. But you don't have to crab on the weekend,
Oh,
right, Henry? The
well,
only time you can get crab is recreational is on Wednesday.
well, I didn't know.
That's.
I never owned a boat.
Yeah, well,
Why would you own a boat? If you were busy at the
because the grandfather, his
Come on,
grandfather.
so you boat.
So, yes, Dale has his boat right now because his trailer's messed up. He has his boat on one of our lifts down the eastern shore. And he was crabbing the other day. And he got a total of 4 crabs. So crabs are slowing up a little bit. But I wanted to say one unbelievable story of Larry. You can't.
Here's the line.
No, gosh, I thought I had to say that.
Well,
Henry said I do. About Larry and crabbing. He bought a boat, but you gotta have a special motor. You have to have one that idles down real slow, because the way we crab is to have a long line with bait on it, like every 3 feet. So Larry stopped at our house one day. Dad had fixed him up with all the stuff he needed, the weights and the floats and the lines. So Larry comes one day to the house, and he had us in stitches. Only he could tell it, but I'll tell you. He comes in and he says, "Irv," that's my father. "Irv," he says, "I'm telling you, I was out fishing," and you know how Larry talks. "I was out fishing, and I'm telling you, I was catching flying blue tips." And we're like, "Flying blue tips?" "Yeah, we were, I was." He said that darn motor wouldn't slow down, and he said it was hitting the bait with the crab on it, and they were flying in the air, and I'm trying to catch them with my net. So he said he was calling them flying blue tips. But he had us in stitches, and he always did anywhere. He, like you said, he was always upbeat. But, you know, in '87, if it wasn't for Pastor Larry being so calm when the fire started, I heard stories because my dad was the president then, and he said, Larry just said, "This is a bump in the road. We got the auditorium down there, we just take everything down there, and that's it." So it's just a bump in the road. And I think if it weren't for him and his demeanor, it would have been a lot tougher for us. The other thing that we could say is that we have Larry to thank for this. He happened to be in here when they were taking the tin ceiling down, and he saw this was still here under that tin ceiling, and he asked if they could, you know, if it could be done again. So thanks to Larry for that too. But as far as helping others, we did, what did we do, the program where you helped people that couldn't do their own checkbooks or pay their bills. He was right in the middle of that. I think, didn't he start EIO? I think he had a lot to do with it. And I almost think that he started it. So Larry made a big impact here. And I appreciate that of him. He was so much fun too.
Amen. Yes, sir. If you don't mind coming up, we can all hear a little better if you do.
I'm good. Hi, most of you know me, but I'm Tim Delgado. Larry was not only my pastor, he was my friend, he was my neighbor. After Larry had been here a while, him and Nancy bought a house and moved into the neighborhood. Well, actually the same peninsula. I was on Cape May Road, they were off the Turkey Point Road. And Larry used to always invite me to come over, and he'd say, just come on over, it's just a walk through the woods. Yeah, 2 ponds, a dry stream bed, fallen trees, barking dogs, yeah, walk through the woods, I'd hop in the car and go visit. Larry and I had a few things in common that we found out over the years, and that one of the things that you mentioned that, and that was him being a magician. We had a good time because during that time I was performing as Timbo the Clown. And I was a magician, but I was a comedy magician, so none of my tricks ever worked. So Larry and I did a few things together. We did one of the festivals at Hoffman Homes, and he did his act, I did mine, and I got pretty used to being his prop. He cut my body in half with a rope. He tied me up and do different things. It was a blast. We spent a lot of time going over tricks. I had a lot of stuff that I collected over the years. I didn't know how it worked. He taught me. Another thing that was mentioned quite prominently today was the boat, Larry's boat. I had a boat too. And there came a time when my boat stopped working, and I called him up, and this was like in October, and I said, I've got to get this out of the water, but I can't get it started. He says, I'll come over. So he's tinkering around with the battery, he's climbing under, he's doing all this stuff. About 20 minutes, he finally goes, I said, what's wrong? He says, it won't start. Okay, so we left it for another day. I kind of forgot about it until one day in February. Get a call from my mother because it was at her pier. She says, I can see the top of your boat. I said, well, that's not good. Where's the rest of it? She says, under the water. So I came to church that morning and told Pastor Larry, he says, well, let's go get it. All right. So we went down, we took a look. He says, well, we probably can't get it today. Let's wait for the next low tide. So we got a low tide and went down and pushed the boat up onto the rocks a little bit. The next Sunday, he says, let's get your boat. We'll bring it down. There's a ramp near my house. We'll bring it down, take it to your driveway. So here we are in February, driving across Mill River in his little open boat. We get there, we're trying to hook mine up. And, it's cold. The water's cold, the air's cold, and I'm leaning over the back of the boat trying to hook onto mine, and it's just not working. And he goes, that's not the way, jumps over the side, in the water, with the rope, hooked up my boat, climbed back in, and we're going across the river, and his teeth are chattering, and my teeth are chattering, and we got to the ramp, and he's getting ready to jump in again. I said, no, I got it. When I hit the water, it was cold. Well, he came right in with me. And we pulled the boat up the ramp. And we loaded it onto a trailer that he had there. Hooked it up and brought it back to my house. Not many pastors would help you on a Sunday afternoon get your boat out of the freezing water. I've got many, many memories. The fire was a big one. Caroling with the youth, confirmation field trips to Hoffman Home. What a wonderful, wonderful man.
Amen. Thank you. In fact, both churches' confirmation classes met up at Hoffman Homes because we had an annual meeting up there. So if I took our confirmation class from Hartford and Perry Hall, up to Hoffman Homes. I usually figured Zion Golden Rings would be over there too, and we'd get together with them. I saw another hand. Come forward, please. That's called our exercise during the services. Oh, absolutely.
Someone doesn't know me, my name's Jane Anderson, and I'm a lifelong member here. Pastor Larry helped me through the darkest time of my life, and I can't thank you, Pastor Larry. He was there for me in a big way. But I do have one little funny story. I sometimes called him when he lived in North Carolina, and I called him. It turns out he had just fallen and broken his other hip. He broke the first hip, and then he broke the second hip. And I said, Pastor Larry, I don't think anybody knows that you broke your other hip. And he goes, what, you think I'm a fool? I would tell people, and they'd be like, well, that fool broke one hip, and then he had to go and break his other hip. So he wasn't going to tell anybody that he broke his other hip. So which I thought his humor just kept on going. So he was a wonderful man, and very important part of our life here. And Joan, I think you didn't say that the dove there, there's a dove up there.
Yep.
Everybody ever comes up here and wants to look at it. I think that was Pastor Larry's idea.
It's true, I heard that one. Another one for Pastor Steve at Hoffman Homes. He was not only the associate director, he was also quite a fundraiser. And he came back to Hartford Road to Zion down there because we had quite a few elderly folks in that church. And he got one of them to actually donate enough to create another cabin on the grassy area of Hoffman Homes in Littlestown. The last cabin on the south side, right before you go to the chapel there, is named for one of the families from Zion, Hartford Road, because of Steve Anderson's ability to get people to give money to that effort. So he was quite a fundraiser too. Anyone else too for either pastor? Well, remember how good they both were and rejoice in the Lord always.
There's a lot that we have to remember for both of these men. I got the chance to meet Steve Anderson. He came to the office when we were in Perry Hall. I had no idea who Steve Anderson was. I didn't know who this guy was, but he came in the office. He shook my hand and talked to me in that broad Texas accent. He was my best friend. I was absolutely convinced he was my best friend, and I'd never met the guy before. And he told me that he had been the pastor at Zion right before Hugh got there. And how deeply he remembered all those members of Zion on Hartford Road, and how deeply he loved them. That's about all I can recall about Steve. He did take me to lunch. He took me to this Asian place to serve this soup that he loved dearly there in Towson. And I said, who's this? What kind of soup is this? And he said, oh, it's a wonderful soup. It comes from a very foreign place. I can't really pronounce it, but you're going to love it. So, okay, I had a bowl of the soup, and there was no meat in it. It was a vegetarian dish. And I found that to be very odd. Here I am, sitting here eating lunch with this Texan, and there ain't no meat anywhere. I was unhappy. But that was Steve. He was everybody's friend. Loud, boisterous, and he made an impression. He certainly made an impression on your hand, if nothing else, because he squeezed as hard as he could possibly squeeze, I think. Now, Larry. Larry I've known a little bit longer than Steve. Even back when I was in Columbia, down in Howard County. Because Larry was always there at every function that the association ever threw. was an English, happy man who always wore a clergy collar at the events that we had. He was a dear heart. I always could count on him to lift me up. I'm sure you all felt the same way. He loved to make connections to people. We used to go to lunch, you know, what's the remnants of the Church of the Muddy Waters, as he named us. Go to lunch, and Larry would be holding forth in that clipped North Carolina Tar Heel accent that he had. And I was reminded him that I grew up just outside of western North Carolina in East Tennessee. As a matter of fact, all my people come from western North Carolina. And I was telling him about this television show when I was a kid that I loved, I dearly loved. It was The Singing Cowboy, Fred Kirby and the Little Rascals. That was my Sunday morning thing when I was a kid. And Larry, in that clipped North Carolina accent, he said, let me tell you, who do you think was my roommate when I was in college? It was Fred Kirby. He loved to make a connection. He loved to make a connection. And then I came here, and he is already down in North Carolina. And of course, I heard all the stories about Larry and about how calm, level-headed, humorous, he never gave up and he never sweat. You never could see Larry Fisher sweat. And so I called him up periodically. And finally, one of my last telephone conversations with Larry, I asked him, well, this is going on in the church, and that is going on in the church, and this one said that, and that one said this. What do you think, Larry? What should I do? And Larry said, well, I tell you, I'm not going to tell you what I do, because you want to do what you want to do. You want to do what you think is right. I always said if I was going to deliver a sermon about Larry Fisher, it would be, well, what would Larry do? Because around here, that mattered. Around here, that made a difference. What Larry would do. Larry's gone now. Larry's not with us. I can no longer call up and ask Larry, what would Larry do? And of course, he can't tell me, you do what you think is right, not what I think is right. So, those are memories that I have of two important men. Two men who worked for God, worked for Christ in this area, in this neighborhood. And they're gone on the same day. Two different Zions joined together now into one congregation, but marked by the passing on the same day of two very important pastors of those two Zion churches. I don't know, sometimes I get a little skeptical about people who say things about, well, it's a sign. It's a sign. It's a sign. We tend to read signs the way we want to read them, maybe not the way they're being given to us. Or maybe in this case it is a sign that we are joined together. We're joined together not just by common experience, but by a common spirit. And I'm grateful for those two lives. I'm grateful for what they did. I'm grateful for what they, in their spirit, continue to do in this place. May God bless each and every one of them.
Amen.
And so let us pray. Oh God of love, We thank you for all with which you have blessed us, even to this day. For the gift of joy and days of health and strength, and for the gifts of your abiding presence and promise in days of pain and grief. We praise you for home and friends, and for all who have dearly lived, and those we have lost. But above all else, we thank you for Christ, who knew our griefs, who died our death, and rose for our sake, and who lives and prays for us even now. And as he taught us, so now we pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our hymn of reflection is in the bowl, there is a flower. It's on page 638 in your hymn. Let us rise and give voice to this beautiful hymn as we are able. And so it is that we commemorate the passing of those who were with us, but are with us no more. And we keep in our minds and our hearts those memories and that love that we knew, because Pastor Larry and Pastor Steve shared this life with us. And we commit their spirits to the keeping of God Almighty. My friends, we've been remembering love and gratitude, two lives that were important. And in doing so, we honor life itself. What can we do to mark such a moment as this, you may ask? You can help. You can support and love those who remain. You can allow them to cry and to grieve, to laugh and to remember. Grief takes its own time to work itself through. But it is so much easier, friends and family, who allow it to be what it has to be. My friends, you can honor your own feelings. Maybe today, maybe later, maybe 6 months later. And you can bless each day that you live and live it to the full in honor of life itself and in the memory of the Reverend Stephen M. Anderson and the Reverend C. Larry Fisher. Amen.